Okay, so this is the morning of September 2nd, 2019. And last night, September the 1st, was the night of the temple burn at Burning Man. And had some very interesting conversations then, and the night before, a couple of very interesting encounters and conversations also. Um, One of the ones tonight was a young man. I think he said he was 21. He's from Manhattan, not Manhattan necessarily, from New York. Um, and I encountered him riding across a fairly dark part of the playa uh, pretty late, um, after the majority of people weren't out running around on the playa on their bicycles. Anyway, I was headed back toward BRC, the city, on my scooter, and he was riding a bicycle, and he pulled alongside and said hello, and I forget what he said, but some typical greeting like, you know, how's it going or whatever. And we ended up talking, which I generally prefer to be left to myself, but I always try to be polite, and especially at Burning Man. So we got into talking. He asked me a whole lot of questions about. This was his first burn, so he asked me a lot of questions about uh, how many times had I gone, what my experiences were, and the main takeaways I got from it. And um, so we got into talking about, as a segue from the positives that I like about Burning Man, he asked what was the single thing I liked most about it, and I said the people. And he asked me to explain that, and as I said, I also like the music and creativity and so on, but the main thing would be the people. We talked about how to get acquainted with more people like the people at Burning Man. Um, and it sort of devolved. It was a long conversation. We had a long distance to go, and kind of devolved into a conversation about life and how to live and what the important things are, how to pick a path. I gave him a fair amount of advice, which actually is one of those conversations I've had occasionally where I just sort of speak what comes to my mind, but afterwards I think, that was, actually pretty correct. That was actually pretty good. If I had the time to really ponder it over a period of days and think about it and take notes and so on, might have been slightly clearer than just the spontaneous conversation, but I think the stuff that I said was actually pretty right. Uh, and we got into how I ended up at Burning Man and how I started out, and mainly about expectations and pleasing other people, and how long it took me in my life to uh, work my way out of it, which I'm still doing, but I've made a lot of progress in that. And he asked how you can do that, and I told him what I thought about that. But when it came down to suggestions or directions, how do you find a particular path? I said, looking back on it, would have done things very differently if I could go back to when I was getting out of high school. I might do something totally unrelated to engineering. Uh, and I said, what I would probably do is be a zoologist, study animals and work with animals. He was surprised at that because we had talked about other things about my career, being an engineer, going to college because my parents expected it, and getting into engineering because they thought, not because they thought it was a good idea, good career, but they approved of it, and staying in engineering long enough to pay off student debts, and then at some point, uh, being aware that I was unhappy working in conventional companies and wanted to work on my own. And he said, what was the main reason for that? And I said, basically, I don't like being told what to do. And, being a 9 to 5 and so on type. But it was really the wanting to be my own boss and run my own life in the way I thought best. And so then we get into other things that I might have done, and I mentioned the zoology and working with animals. He was very surprised at that because it didn't sound like anything else I had talked about. And I said, well, look for what gives you joy, um, and that may be something to spend your life doing. But I said, when you do that, be sure to cast your net widely. Because if you had asked me when I was getting out of high school, working with animals is not something I would have even remotely thought of. It just would have never occurred to me. Um, but looking at my life, I've really cared a lot about figuring out why animals do what they do, trying to interpret their feelings, their thinking, um, how they relate to each other, the relationships in groups. All of that's really, really fascinating to me. But it's nothing at all that I've studied or ever thought about trying to make a living, working with. And so I just said, cast your net very widely, because if you just take a few minutes and think about, well, what are the things I might get joy from or be really, might be really satisfying to me, it may be that one of the main or even the main thing that you might get most out of life from might not pop up. You might have to really think about it and, review your life and things that have given you joy in the past or might. And then I also got into talking about trying to really visualize that. And I basically mentioned the yoga technique of magnetic will meditation. But basically, you meditate on what you think you want in life, what your goal might be. But you try to make it as real as possible, what it would, not just what it would look like or sound like, or what it would look like in details, but what it would feel like, emotionally, and, what would it smell like, what would it feel like. But try to picture it as real as you can. But then the main thing, difference between that and visualization is then commit energy to it. And I explained in that technique, you don't really have to have any idea how it can be achieved, but you think of something you could do, commit energy to doing, that might be related to that. It could be obvious and direct. Like there might be something very clear that you should do to get there, but it may not be. It may be that you don't have any idea how you have the skills or knowledge or whatever to do to get this thing that you want. But you don't have to. You just think of the thing that seems most likely to help in that direction and commit energy to doing it. And then be open to the universe popping things into your life that may turn out to be things that can lead to that, that can be very unexpected and very indirect. There may be no direct path, but it may be that you'll meet someone or have some experience that will really help make clear how to get to that. Or things will cooperate with you for getting to that. So he was, at the end of the conversation, we stopped writing and pedaling and talked a little more, and he seemed really impressed with those ideas. And he repeated them back a few times. I think he was trying to, be sure he remembered it all. And we talked about how he was saying how that in his time at his first Burning Man, it seemed like he encountered people spontaneously that, had some relevance to something or some meaning. And I was saying, yeah, it really works that way. And to get back to the magnetic will thing, just be really alert, because the universe, or whatever you want to call it, could put something into your path. And if you're not, looking for things, you might just go by it and not see any relevance to you. So I was saying that I think that really happens a lot more if you're open to that. Because in my experience, if you're not thinking about that, generally things pretty much go in the normal way that you expect things to go. But if you're really open to that, sometimes some really amazing connections can happen. And so I think he thought that was one of those kind of really meaningful random encounters that I think are really quite typical at Burning Man. A lot of other people write about that. And it really has struck me over the 10 years I've gone that really happens a lot. It could be about something very trivial, like you need a battery for something and you'll run into somebody and happen to mention it and they'll have them and give them to you. That happened to me today or yesterday also. It's just being open to the possibility those things will pop into your life, so you'll notice when they do, and then being aware that they may not lead where you expect them to go. Like the universe may have a different idea of what's better for you to be doing, and it may be good to follow that. I mean, you have to be rational about it, and use your judgment, and not just assume that everything that comes into your life has some sort of meaning that you should religiously follow. But those things do tend to pop in, and if you acknowledge that there may be an idea or a plan or a wisdom there that's better than what you have in mind, either for you or for others, and be willing to go with that. But anyway, we talked about a whole lot of different things, and at the end, he just said that was that conversation was really the kind of thing that he thought, uh, the kind of encounter he really hoped to get at Burning Man or just in general. And, he thought it was really significant for him and was very appreciative. Uh, and before, earlier in the conversation, I had told him about running into people this time at Burning Man that I also got a lot out of, that were just random, unexpected encounters that turned out to be very meaningful. And I'll make another note about a woman named Maggie that I had met earlier in the day that really had an impact on me. That was another just sort of out of the blue encounter. Anyway, I wanted to mention that conversation with Elliot, and before I forget all the details. And so that's it. So, speaking about September 1st at Burning Man 2019, which was yesterday, I talked about an encounter with a young man named Elliot. And I mentioned I had had an encounter earlier in the day with a woman named Maggie. That was at the temple burn. And afterwards, I was sitting there in my mobility scooter waiting for all the foot traffic to clear out and make enough space for me to move. And a woman came over who I would guess is maybe in her 50s, had gray hair, but fairly young looking. And she said, "I'd like to give you a hug," which is not as unusual as you would think at Burning Man just generally. But she gave me a big hug, and then she asked if I had lost someone. A lot of the people, a very large percentage of the people that go to the temple do so to leave notes or little memorials or articles from people were that they were close to that have died recently, or mementos of new relationships or relationships that have broken up, or things they've forgiven other people for in the past, or asking for forgiveness, and write out uh, a statement about that, or something in memory of those things. And some people leave pictures and items that belong to people or whatever. But then watching the temple burn, it's sort of like releasing all that, letting it all go. And it's very cathartic for a lot of people. And I haven't done that except once. 3 or 4 years ago, my friend Rita Anderson died. And she had been a great travel companion and adventure companion. And we would see each other maybe 3 or 4 times a year when there was some big event some big off-roading trip or space conference or whatever that we had a mutual interest in, and would take trips or whatever. And I always thought she was really a great person and a great companion. Uh, but I never really kind of realized uh, how important she was till she got cancer and passed away very unexpectedly. So a few years ago, I made up an album of pictures I had taken of her and other people on various adventures, or with me, or uh, just photographs that really I thought were of things that were important and showed what was important in her life and about her friendship. And wrote a page or so memorandum for her memorial, um, for my sort of private memorial for her, just running for all the reasons I really admired her and how important she had been. But the woman, when she asked if I had lost someone, in connection with Burning Man, since I had done that and taken something out to the temple to burn, sort of in her memory, it was a few years earlier, but I just happened to think of that, so I mentioned that, and I think she assumed that was recent, as of this year. But when I was talking about it, even though it was years ago, I got so choked up I couldn't talk. And and tears were just flowing down my face. And she was hugging me. And it just unbottled a lot of emotion that apparently I was still carrying about that, carrying with me about that. So we talked about that a little bit, and she talked about the importance of hugs, and I mentioned that I thought that touch was a very unappreciated thing in communicating and sharing feelings, and so we kind of agreed about that. And basically, she was just being consoling. I think when she saw me sitting there, she had the impression that, I was carrying some feelings about something like that. So again, that was just a random encounter, which, I mean, random seeming encounter, but which was meaningful, uh, that tends to happen here, the Burning Man. And I think can happen in life generally if you're open to it. And again, I don't think that kind of thing happens a lot if you're not aware that it could or think that it could. But it happens a lot in Burning Man. It has for me and for other people. I think a lot of that may have to do with the fact that everybody feels eventually, took me 2 or 3 years, but either right away or eventually feels accepted and realizes that no matter who they are or what they're like, they're really completely accepted here. And it gives you a real feeling of being able to approach other people, talk to other people, let them know what your feelings are, um, listen to what their feelings are. They feel able to approach you, like the young man Elliot or uh, Maggie at the temple burn, and you can really communicate deeply, uh, because it really feels okay to do that. One of the principles of Burning Man is uh, radical self-expression, and another is radical inclusion. And that works to make people feel accepted enough and not judged enough that they feel that they can really say things from the heart or hear things from other people in that way of hearing. And so it does happen a lot, and it has a lot of meaning. Um, and I'll mention one more person or a couple more people uh, from the night that the man burned a day earlier. So after the man burned, generally milling around, riding around, people riding their bicycles all over the playa, uh, going to different music, different art, uh, going with different groups of friends. Uh, I was listening to some music, I think the Mayan Warrior, and recording it from the back of the crowd because I pretty much have to be at the back of the crowd, clear of all the bicycles and people standing, so that I can move, turn my scooter around and get out without being trapped by the people and bicycles that are parked all over the place. So I was sort of at the back of the crowd, which was fine anyway. I was recording the music. And a young man who was standing back there came over to me after a while and started a conversation. And I would say he was maybe 30, 35, had a beard. Anyway, started talking to me, and um, he started off by saying he was glad, saying, "I'm glad you're here." I mean, and another person earlier in the day, a very pleasant looking young woman had come up to me and said, "I'm glad you're here." So they're not sure exactly what it is, but I think what it is that I'm obviously elderly. I have a white beard and, uh, obviously look like an older person, but mainly I think because I was in a mobility scooter that I use because of my muscular dystrophy keeps me from walking long distances. But and there was a really nice young woman 4 or 5 years ago that did the same thing at the burn night. Came up to me and said that uh, said you're my hero, and I had no idea what she was talking about. But I'm pretty sure. I mean, she told me a little bit about her father had been handicapped and how before he passed away, they had gone and done a lot of things together with him in his wheelchair, and how much it had meant to her. So I think, she saw me there, and maybe favorably because of her experience with her father being disabled and all that. But what she was saying about the hero part was that uh, I think she really admired that somebody my age and with a handicap would manage to get myself to a place like Burning Man and handle all that and not let age be a reason to just sort of sit back on a recliner and, do typical age things. Um, and she wanted to give me a hug too. So back to the young man in 2019, the night of the man burned. He said, "I'm glad you're here," and so I started asking him about that, and he said, "Well, he thought the universe had, you know, caused me to come and be there." So we talked about that kind of thing a little bit, and um, and about the kind of encounters that we have there. So anyway, uh, tonight or uh, earlier tonight, on the night of the temple burn, as I was riding along, uh, after talking to Maggie, but before running into Elliot, riding along on the playa again by myself, and you can be hundreds of feet or yards, hundreds of yards from anybody else because it's really vast. Uh, it goes on for square miles, not the city part, but beyond that. So riding along, and actually it was before the temple burned, but that day. But the day after I had talked to the man who said he was glad I was here. So just riding along by myself, and one other person was riding kind of diagonally across, and it turned out to be the same guy. So he said hi, and we acknowledged having talked the night before, and had a really nice little talk and shook hands, and uh, talked again about the kind of encounters we have here. So that was really another one of those just encounters out of 70 or 80,000 people, most of whom are out milling around over square miles of space, really separated, that we would just cross paths again and talk again. And then I can't remember if I got his name. I'll try to remember. Maybe I can add it on later. But I can't remember what it is at the moment. At any rate, I'll talk about the other encounter on the day of the man burning with another person who approached me and said that it's good that you're here, or I'm glad that you're here. Anyway, I'll do that next. So the final memo of the night after the temple burned, going back to the night that the man burned. And again, I was sitting somewhere listening to music, sitting in my mobility scooter, and a really very nice looking, I would say 30 something woman uh, came over to me and said, I'm glad that you're here. And so we got into talking about that. And again, it was just one of those conversations. I think it's because I look like a handicapped person and I'm elderly and so on. And she probably thought, it's really good to see somebody that age and with disabilities getting out and doing something, really that's an adventure or whatever. So we had a very nice talk and hugs. And so she was about to uh, move away, and I held my arms out to give her a hug, which is basically what everybody does. Pretty much everybody that talks to anybody about anything, starts or ends with hugs. Uh, so I reached out just to give her a little hug, and she gave me this really strong, long hug. And it was just very, very heartfelt. And again, it's very like the other encounters I just described and other encounters I've had where I've really gotten into talking to people. And I think it's that in spiritual terms, you would put it, souls recognizing souls. I would put it, it's like one living being really noticing another living being. And to me, that inspires love. Uh, I think that's why people instinctively love babies. It's like you look at their eyes and you just see a life there. And there's something that's so important about life that it's hard not to love the possessor of that life. And so, again, at Burning Man, when some of these really interesting encounters have happened, I think I think people on both sides really feel that spark or feel that life or feel that soul and really connect to it. And I don't mean it in some uh, hippie type way, or not that I have anything against hippies, but any way that is conditioned by being a part of a group or something being trendy or anything like that. But I think it's just something that actually happens. Um, and again, I've encountered that kind of thing a lot at Burning Man, usually at least 2 or 3 times when I've come. And it's always just spontaneous. Like I'm going past someone or they're going past me, and for whatever reason, one of us will say something to the other or turn and walk over and give somebody a hug. And it often turns into a conversation that turns out to be very meaningful one for one or both people. Not just not not at all just casual conversation or friendly conversation, but something really meaningful on a really deep level. So that was my encounter with her. Then she went on, and I went on with running around the playa and listening to music and so on. There was, uh, there are two other things that this has made me think of, and I'll record them next. So the other thing that happened yesterday, the Temple Burn Day, is I'm camping this year with 4 people. My friends Martin and Rayetta, who are a couple, and a friend of theirs named Mizra, or his name is Elvin, Elvin. His last name, it turns out, is Mizrayev. And I had assumed from the way he talked and looked that he was Indian or maybe Pakistani, something like that. But it turns out he's from Azerbaijan and is a Nazari. And they're a part of the Turkic people, which extends from the Turks on the west into western China on the east and up, into the area of the Mongols. And the Mongols and the Turks and all of these different peoples from history that were of the Turkic culture, which doesn't mean necessarily originating from or in Turkey. It's just a name that got applied to them probably because Turkey, the people of Turkey are Turkic people. But we got into a really long conversation about that. And, then we talked about a whole lot of other things. And he also wondered about careers, life, um, philosophies of life. Uh, but it started out just, he happened to be in Martin and Rietta's trailer when I happened to come by, and we ended up sitting on a couch together. And while we were waiting for Martin and Rietta to get ready to do something, we were chatting a little bit, and then got into this really long conversation. And Martin ended up having to go off and do some other stuff before he came back, and we had this long conversation. And it turned out to be really interesting. I hadn't really talked to Alvin uh, other than just really casually, but it wasn't one of those soul to soul kind of encounters. But again, it was just a real getting to know a whole lot about somebody else and them about you, and really sharing really basic stuff about what your beliefs are, what's really important to you in life. Uh, he told me about. I think he's traveled. He's probably like 35. Wait, no, actually, he said he's 35. And apparently, he worked for some startup and made a lot of money, and decided instead of continuing that uh, money making business starting thing, that what was really important to him was traveling and seeing the world. So he said he's been to about 50 countries, and we got into talking about, the what you want to do with your life. You just want to have a career and, you know, conform and do that all your life, and then retire and end up in a recliner and, watch old reruns. And is that the arc of a meaningful, successful life? So he decided that he didn't want to, continue that, at least at the time. So he's been traveling around the world. And we got into talking about, well, why do people do that? And it's like, well, partly it's because everybody, their parents tell them that that's what you do. The people that you work for tell you that's what you do. People that have done it and retired like to think that that's the right thing to have done and tell you it's what to do. But anyway, he decided to take a break from that. And he was saying, well, why do people do all of that? And talking about how you kind of get conditioned to. But it's based on, I was saying it's based on a lot of it. Part of it is based on getting more. Like, you want a bigger house, you want a 2-car garage with 2 cars, you want more stuff all of the time because the economy, and say why, and why are we indoctrinated to that? And I said, well, it makes the economy work. It provides all these jobs and so on. But you, we got into talking about how you don't really actually need that. He brought it up and said that he was in Guatemala recently, and in some really small village, and I think they don't even have electricity, but they certainly don't have electronics, and basically they uh, just eat what they grow, or can find, and are farmers. And he said they don't even have toilet paper. It's like, really basic living. But he said they're happy. And he talked about how, how people there are generally really happy, and they're happy with their lives. And, you know, most people in more developed countries would think that they ought to be miserable for not having all this stuff. And I'm sure there are a lot of people that don't have stuff and are miserable too. But the point was, you can be not looking to add more all of the time in order to be happy. So anyway, that turned out to be a long conversation and very, very interesting. I hadn't thought of Elvin being, somebody I would have good, you know, really deep conversations with, but it turned out to be. So that was Elvin, and was a departure from the series of the kind of meaningful encounters that you have at random here. But I wanted to throw that in so I don't forget it. So now my final presuming that I'll think of something else. One of these random meaningful encounters next. So the final meaningful encounter at Burning Man, for tonight anyway, before I forget, because it all fits in with this, was in one of the first burns that I went to. It might have been my first one. And at the time I had an electric bicycle. I had muscular dystrophy way before now. But at the time I could balance and ride a bicycle without a problem. So I had an electric bicycle. And I'd gone out toward the burning of the man. And at the time there were like 50,000 people altogether at Burning Man that year, and probably 35 or 40,000 of them, go out to maybe 80%, 70, 80% of the people at Burning Man every year go to the burns, or at least the man burn. Not all of them go to the temple burn. But anyway, after it's over, there is this mass exodus of people heading back to the camps and out to various other places. So I was on the main avenue that connects the center of the camp area, the actual Black Rock City, to the open playa. And I just sitting, sort of enjoying watching all the people coming back from the burn and all the lights and they were wearing, and just the general movement of all the light across this flat playa. And there was one woman walking opposite. I was facing out toward the man, towards the people coming toward me from the burn. And there was a woman walking maybe 50 feet away, going the other direction, and a very attractive looking woman, maybe 30, I would guess, that I would guess was maybe Greek. She had a Mediterranean kind of look, and long black hair, and was just wearing this black bikini. Just very normal, very normal appearance for Burning Man, and coming back from an event at night. And I wasn't particularly looking at her. I didn't. I don't think I even noticed her until she turned and started walking toward me. And she just walked over to me and gave me a really strong hug. And I, it was my first burn. I'm pretty sure. And I couldn't think of anything to say, so I just said "Happy Burn," and she said "Happy Burn" and gave me this really strong hug, and then just walked off and on to wherever she was going. And it's like that kind of random thing where people just, for no apparent reason, pick you out and come either just give you a big hug or say something, and often it turns out to be very meaningful to you. And that was to me, and I think it was to me in the sense that it helped start making me feel like I belonged there. Like I wasn't an outsider at this special kind of event for special kind of people that I wasn't one of. But it helped start breaking the ice for me to feel like, okay, maybe this non-judgment, you know, radically inclusive thing is actually so. And it was just a nice thing for me emotionally. But again, those kind of things just happen, and they happen a lot. And often they turn out to be really deep encounters when you get talking to people for some reason, either for something they spontaneously say or you do, and it turns out it makes some kind of really important connection between you that results in some really deep sharing. And again, to me, that ends up engendering a really strong feeling of love. Uh, and I think it was the woman I mentioned earlier after the man burn uh, that had come over and given me the hug. And I think in the moment, I was feeling that loving feeling. And I think I said, you know, I love you or something like that. And she said, I love you, and gave me that really strong hug. It's like you really feel it. And it's happened often enough to me that I can tell from other people's reactions that whether anybody says anything or not, that kind of making a really deep connection with people, I think, naturally engenders the feeling of love. Uh, that may be entirely imaginary in my head, but after 10 years of many of these encounters, and occasionally getting into really long, deep conversations, I'm pretty sure that's how it works, at least here. And I think it may work in general when you make a really deep contact with anyone in any location or context. So that's it for random encounters, and it's not starting to get light out yet, but I do need to get sleep and get ready for the final the final full day I'll be here, which will probably be mainly cruising slowly around the playa looking for any little bits of trash that other people haven't picked up. It's truly amazing how little trash there is with recently 70 or 80,000 people spending a week. And you almost never see any kind of piece of trash on the ground anywhere during the event or after. And after, uh, people clean up their own trash, but they'll also go around just looking all over the playa for any little bits they can pick up and take out. So that principle of leave no trace is really remarkably observed here. So I'll probably go around doing my part, looking for any little bits to pick up, and just visiting with whoever is left over by tomorrow. Probably only a quarter or a fifth of the people will still be here, but it's a really wonderful atmosphere. It's just so totally relaxed, and there's just a very serene, relaxed feeling, very casual feeling, and it's uh, just a really, really nice time to encounter people or just appreciate the desert and the playa, the lake bed, and the mountains in the distance. Uh, anyway, I've got to gather some energy for that. So that's it for tonight.